Hello everybody and welcome to This Upbeat Life, the show where we take a light-hearted look at life and go on a journey to find out how people stay physically and mentally happy. I'm Simon JJ Green and I'll be interviewing ordinary, bog-standard people as well as looking at the latest in wellness, health science, nature and the quirkier side of the health and wellbeing industry. Now, let's get cracking with today's episode. Welcome to another episode of This Upbeat Life. And on today's show, on Quick News. To step 10,000 times or not to step 10,000 times? That is the question. Have you ever gone to bed, hands behind your head and thought to yourself, well, that ceiling could do with a lick of paint? Or, 9,742 steps. Well, that's it. Health cancelled. I'll see you all at my funeral. Because really, that's what 10,000 steps has become, hasn't it? Not a guideline or a suggestion. We've all been brainwashed into a daily moral judgment. If you miss it, you're lazy. If you hit it, virtuous, glowing beacon of righteous wellness. But there's a catch. That magical number, 10,000, is completely made up. Yes, shock horror, knees up, Mother Brown. The whole 10,000 step idea didn't come from doctors, scientists, or some ancient Greek philosopher wandering around in his or her sandals. No, it came from a marketing campaign, gosh darn it. In the 1960s, a Japanese company launched a pedometer called the Manpo Kai, which literally means 10,000 step meter. The Japanese written character for 10,000 looks like a person walking. So they used that, sort of like auspicious. Now, to be fair, brilliant branding, really. Catchy, a round number, and sounds impressive. But scientifically, about as evidence-based as, drink 8 glasses of water a day or don't swim after eating or you'll immediately get cramp and die. So, if 10,000 is just really a marketing slogan, is there actually any science behind it? Well, if you didn't hit your 10,000 step target today, you can go and put your feet up. Studies now show that you can get significant health benefits from far fewer steps. Yes, doing around 4,000 to 7,000 steps a day reduces your risk of an early death, unless you get run over by a bus doing your 10,000 steps, of course, and it improves your heart health. In fact, one large study found that once you reach around 7,000 steps, the benefits keep increasing, but much more slowly. So in other words, you get most of the reward before you've even finished your second podcast episode of the day. Bearing in mind that my podcast should be the first one of the day. Just saying. And here's the best bit. There's no magic about 10,000. No fireworks, no confetti. It's just a nice, juicy round number. Even fitness researchers say the real advice is simply do a bit more than you're doing now, which is amazingly vague. I mean, it's taken me 25 steps to go to the kitchen and get a donut. If I do a bit more than I'm doing now, then it will be 50 steps and another donut. Now, before we all collectively throw our step counters into the Thames River, let's be clear. Walking is still fantastic exercise. You can't get away from that. The more you move, the better your health outcomes tend to be, especially if you move away from the donuts. Lower risk of heart disease, longer life, all the good stuff. But this is not permission to say, well, I've done 73 steps today, that's it, I'm basically an elite athlete. No, movement does matter, but obsessing over a specific number, that's just bonkers. We've reached a stage where modern life has turned this into a strange daily ritual. People pacing around their living room at 10:47 p.m. like caged zoo animals. Just 600 more steps. I refuse to let big pedometer win. Or walking laps of the kitchen while brushing their teeth. Or, yes, this does happen, shaking their wrist wildly to trick their smartwatch, which, if anything, should technically count as a separate workout. Now, in fact, my Fitbit regularly counts phantom steps. I've quite often done 300 plus steps in my sleep. I've checked the CCTV and with my partner, and I don't sleepwalk, just snore like a large warthog. And there's another angle to all this 10,000 step business as well. Psychologically, it can actually backfire. There's this quiet guilt that creeps in if you don't hit the number. You could have had a great day, eaten well, moved around, felt good, but suddenly, only 8,000 steps? Who even am I anymore? Go in a corner and hang your head in shame. So what should we do instead? Maybe we should think of 10,000 not as a rule, but as a nice stretch goal on a sunny day when you fancy a long walk, a wander through the park, or pretending you're in a montage from a wellness documentary. But on a busy Tuesday, nah, 7,000 steps, hallelujah. 6,000 steps, brilliant. 4,000, still genuinely beneficial. Even small increases make a difference, because what all the research is saying is quite simple. More movement is equal to better health. Not perfect movement, not a round number movement, just more than yesterday. So tonight, if you check your step count and it's not quite 10,000, relax, forget about it. You're not failing at life, you're just not in a 1960s Japanese marketing campaign. And to be fair, that sounds like a healthy step in the right direction. And on the real deal, to climb trees or not to climb trees, that is the question. I'll go out on a limb here and say that, yeah, we should, especially the kids. What prompted this topic is the fact that I am a forest school leader, and one of the things I do is let kids climb trees according to their ability, as it's an intrinsic part of the forest school ethos. As a side note, I also let them use knives, whittling, and make and light fires, cook, etc. The youngest kids I have are about 4 years old and the oldest are teens. Anyway, a parent was horrified when they found out that I let kids climb trees. What if they fall, they asked. And apparently, they bounce was the wrong answer. Because the way I see it, if they're making you climb the walls, you might as well make them climb some trees. Everyone's a winner. And there was also a study published in the International Journal of Early Childhood Environmental Education in 2017 called Benefits and the Risks of Tree Climbing on Child Development and Resiliency. Catchy title. One of the statistics they quoted was that in the UK alone, 1/3 of 6 to 15-year-olds have never climbed a tree. But times have changed. Back in the day, trees were chock full of kids climbing and leaping and sometimes falling. Nowadays, instead of it being a childhood rite of passage and adventure, it's now just a lawsuit waiting to happen. But climbing trees is in our DNA, gosh darn it. Not so long ago, we were all arboreal apes practically living in trees, climbing them for food resources, for protection, to avoid predators and dangerous animals, until we were fed up with the falling out of said trees and decided that being on the ground with all the predators was safer. And perhaps this is why most kids are drawn to a tree. The distant echoes of their ancestors whispering, "You know you want to do it. Get up there, you wimp." Now, when I was a kid, I did not have the giddy pleasure or luck of having magnificent oaks, birches and hornbeams to climb. Oh no, I grew up in Hong Kong and so had the misfortune of only having trees not much bigger than your average bush. And most of the trees were home to various snakes, and I didn't want to disturb them because, I'm considerate that way and scared. Anyway, when I arrived in the UK at age of 30 and went into my first forest, I was straight up the first climbable tree. There is something very satisfying about being 20 or 30 feet up on a branch, in and amongst the leaves, looking out or down. It's almost like a conquest. Well, actually, a word of advice, don't look down. And when my kids were born, as soon as they were able, straight into the forest to find trees to earmark for later climbing. So I'll start with the obvious. Yes, there is a risk. Of course there is. It's a tree, not a sofa. Trees are uneven, occasionally wobbly, and famously uninterested in health and safety guidelines, and anyone listening who has climbed a tree will know that they are very good at removing skin, much like a cheese grater. When you factor in a young child into the mix, it can get a bit fraught. But not all risk is bad. In fact, there's a growing body of thought that children actually need what experts call risky play. Not reckless, chaotic, hold my juice box and watch this behaviour, but manageable, supervised risk. The kind where a child tests their limits, figures out what they can do, and occasionally realises actually that branch is a bit too ambitious. And this is where the magic of childhood development happens, because when a child climbs a tree, they're not just climbing a tree. They're making decisions, like, can I reach that branch? Is this one strong enough? What happens if I put my foot here? Why am I so high? And oh bugger, how am I going to get down? It's physics, engineering, and self-awareness, all wrapped up in mud and leaves and band-aids. And critically, they learn these lessons far more effectively than if an adult simply says, don't do that. Because let's be honest, don't do that has got to be the least effective phrase in the history of parenting. It ranks just below, you won't like beer and bedtime is fun. But climbing trees also builds confidence in a very quiet, organic way. There's no certificate at the end, no medal, no round of applause, just a small human, or a big one like me, sitting on a branch, looking very pleased with themselves and thinking, I did it. And that kind of confidence shapes a child. It's earned, it's real. It's very different from the modern tendency to praise children for sort of essentially existing near an activity. Great job standing next to the tree, Oliver. Outstanding proximity work. Importantly, it also fosters a connection with nature. Spending time outdoors and engaging in activities like tree climbing can help children connect with the natural world and reap the benefits of being outside. And then there's a physical side, climbing is a full body workout disguised as play. Arms, legs, balance, coordination, it's all happening at once. And let's not forget imagination. A tree is never just a tree. It's a pirate ship, a castle tower, a secret lookout point, or, if siblings are involved, a highly strategic base in an ongoing war that began sometime around breakfast 2 years ago. And if you're really, really lucky, you'll have a tree house. Now, screens can do many wonderful things, but they can't replicate the feeling of sitting in a tree, slightly hidden, slightly elevated, breeze through the leaves, watching the world from a new perspective. It's a grand adventure, and childhood runs on those adventures. Now, of course, this doesn't mean we throw caution to the wind and encourage children to scale anything taller than the average lamppost. There is a sensible middle ground, what I like to call freedom with boundaries. A good climbing tree is sturdy, not too tall, with branches that are spaced in a way that feels climbable rather than have you searching for a rope. The ground underneath ideally should be grass or mud because concrete is less forgiving. And for peace of mind, not for the child, an adult nearby who is pretending not to have kittens. It's a given that a kid is going to slip. There might be a scrape or a bruise, but those small knocks are part of learning, sort of nature's haptic feedback, if you like. And this is how kids discover their limits. Now, of course, I did my research and firstly asked the kids I work with what they thought about climbing trees. And the answers varied from "it's brilliant" to "mum says I'm not allowed to." But my favourite was a child who said it was a good way to escape a Tyrannosaurus Rex if it was chasing you. I also turned to the most important sources of information on the planet, which is Reddit and Threads. On Reddit and Threads, I asked a simple question: do you let your kids climb trees? I'll read out a couple of the responses, of which I had 186 from Threads, and on Reddit I had 190. Yes, I let them climb trees. It's a great way to teach them about all sorts of things. In a little under 1 hour this Monday morning, I learnt a lot about nature, exercise, gravity, and first aid. The next one says, I didn't climb trees as a kid, but I had the agility, balance, and strength of a biodegradable napkin in a monsoon, so it was more a skill issue than prohibited. I'm a millennial, so it's law that we know at least one person in our friend circles who broke their arm falling out of a tree. Yeah, and another one says, yes, I was never allowed to do anything that might be dangerous or get my clothes dirty as a child. I was born in 1994. I wanted my son to have a different upbringing. He's practically feral and climbs every tree he can. He's been attending a forest school since he was 2 years old and now he's 10. And another one says, I was talking about this a week or so ago. Turns out about 80 kids used to die a year back in the day from falling out of trees and many more injured, some paralysed, etc. I myself have had 2 pretty nasty falls as a kid climbing trees, once only saved by my trousers snagging on the way down. I think it's really about the degree of it. Would you let a child scale a 30-metre oak tree? Nope. But what about a 10-foot apple tree? Yes, of course. And then you're into the middle ground. I do get why some parents are risk-averse. Tarquin. Dear. Yeah, Tarquin mustn't hurt himself as he has piano lessons on Thursday, but then getting out of bed is a risk these days. Right. Next one. I am 38 and have never climbed a tree. Please don't let your kids be like me. Next one. I remember as kids, 4 or 5 of us up a tree, or on top of the bonfire we were building. Such what Nellie's parents are of today. The 1970s rocked. And the next one of my favourite. I was born in 1949 and my late brother in 1942. His idea of looking after me when our parents went out was chasing me up the small apple tree and he'd go up on another bigger one and we'd lob fruit at each other. The windfall went into pies our mother made. And once he turned 14, he moved on to other interests, but I treasure those years. And I still climb trees when the opportunity comes around. This would make this chap or her 77. And so on. Over 90% of the respondents enthusiastically encouraged their children to climb a tree, and nearly all said that they told their kids, I'm not helping you. If you're able to go up by yourself, then you can come down by yourself. So next time when the opportunity arises, try climbing a tree yourself, the lowest branch if you have to see what you've been missing, and you might find yourself being a tree believer. And in far-out stuff, there are many talents one might aspire to in life, like playing the piano, learning to speak fluent Italian, unless you're already an Italian, or parallel parking without someone shouting, "Oi, you can't park there, mate." But I now invite you to think about a different, lesser-known skill, one that sits quietly beneath your feet waiting to be discovered. Worm charming. Yes, charming worms. No, not charming worms in the sense of a candlelit dinner and whispering sweet nothings, although frankly no one's ruled that one out, but rather coaxing them out of the ground using rhythm, vibration and even music. This is not even a niche hobby invented by someone in a shed last Tuesday. Oh no, this is a proud British tradition, complete with rules, techniques and, naturally, a championship. Now, the World Worm Charming Championships, try saying that quickly after a couple of Cornish pasties and a pint, held every year in the small village of Williston in Cheshire. It's exactly what it sounds like. Competitors gather with various professional worm charming tools, think garden forks and the like, and attempt to lure as many worms as possible to the surface within a set time and within a set area. And we have to ask ourselves, why would anyone want to charm worms out of the ground? Well, obviously fishermen, or fisher people, need worms for fishing, so this is apparently the origin story. But how does it work, you might ask? What exactly do you have to do in order to coax a worm to the surface without digging them up? Well, the main part is vibrating the soil using methods such as sticking a garden fork or a wooden stake into the ground and then tapping the said item with an implement. This sends vibrations into the ground that the worm finds really groovy, and they come flocking to the surface to find out what all the fuss is about. Of course, it's not just called worm charming either, nor is it just confined to the southwest of the UK. It's got names like grunting, twanging, whooping, and fiddling, and depending on the method of charming being used. Now, this quaint pastime can also be found in, of all places, Canada, and that fantastically named Sop Choppy in Florida. So really, why would a bunch of worms come to the surface just for the sake of a bunch of vibrations? Well, according to a scientific study, the vibrations mimic the sound of moles digging, which sends worms into a panic, prompting them to flee to the surface. So maybe less charming, more mild psychological warfare. But in Britain, naturally, we've turned a village eccentricity into a polite competitive pastime, because if there's one thing we excel at, it's taking something faintly ridiculous and giving it structure, rules, and a tea break with Jammy Dodger biscuits. At some competitions, competitors are encouraged to wear fancy dress. You can imagine it, can't you? Some person dressed up as a giant crow, and then a poor worm is trying to escape a mole, and he comes up and sees the crow. Oh, it's just too much. Anyway, they're encouraged to wear fancy dress and are allocated a patch of ground, usually a couple of meters square, and given 30 minutes to coax out as many worms as possible. You can have a team of 3, consisting of a charmerer, a pickerer, and a counterer. No digging or forking is allowed, but some competitions allow non-poisonous potions, though you have to prove this by drinking some of it in front of the judges. And you can picture the scene, a few hundred people in fancy dress, crammed into a field, twanging garden forks, stamping feet, doing the conga, playing violins, and even singing. And then you'll have someone picking the worms, another one counting them, and this is about as British as you can probably get. And some of the competitions raise money for local charities as well. And there are rules as well to protect the worms. All worms are returned to the wild at the end of the day in the dark so that they're not a feast for birds. And the as yet unbroken world record for number of worms ever collected in 30 minutes, you ask? An astounding 567 worms by 10-year-old Sophie Smith in 2009. I also think it's worth mentioning that the humble worms are an essential part of the ecosystem. They are natural engineers that improve soil quality, they boost plant growth, and by breaking down organic matter, they play a role in the carbon cycle and can help reduce atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. And the worms are a key food source for birds, mammals, and insects, making them an essential link in many food chains. And lastly, you might want to avoid worm charming in Australia, where naturally they have the world's biggest worms, the giant Gippsland worm. Typically around 1 meter long, but they can reach up to 3 meters, which is about 10 feet. Yikes! And that's it for today. Thanks for listening, everybody. As always, I'd appreciate it if you could like, follow, and subscribe to my show, This Upbeat Life, so I know I'm on the right track. And even better, leave a review and share it with your friends. Until next time, remember, happiness is the best medicine. Cheerio.